Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bill Baker. I'm with Firestorm, and this is the RenWeb Crisis Coach webinar series. This is number 12 in the 2016 series, and it's the year in review. You can go to webinars at Firestorm, or just firestorm.com, and look for webinars. We have all of the previous ones recorded, both for this year and then prior years. Interesting stuff if you want to follow it. We'd also like to have you become our friend. Firestorm Solutions, Facebook, Firestorm Soul, Twitter. Hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. Our lawyers ask us to please remind you that the presentation today is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and this work product should be discussed in conjunction with the advice of your organization's personal counsel. Please do not interpret this information as legal advice or legal opinion. This webinar series is underwritten by the RenWeb group, and we're pleased to have had them as the hosts and co-sponsors of this webinar series for at least the last 3 years. I don't believe that we have a representative. We'll ask Jim Satterfield, president of Firestorm and today's presenter, to talk about the wonderful things at RenWeb. Jim?
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for that, Bill. And Scott's normally with us, so I think he's helping the school at the moment at RenWeb. There have been a lot of exciting things over the course of the year with this webinar series. This is the 12th in that series. There was the user group meeting also this summer in Miami, and for those of you who haven't ever been to a user group meeting, I would encourage you to go. It's a great chance to network and a great chance to learn and to see a variety of different programs in place. At that time, there'll be another conference next summer, again in July, and so it'll be an opportunity for you to participate there. As Bill has given you the information in Firestorm, the webinars that we've done are recorded, as this one will be today, and you can refer back to it or share it with others within your school. So my name's Jim Satterfield. I'm the president and co-founder of Firestorm, and glad to be with you today as part of our discussion. And the website that Bill talked about is at firestorm.com. If you go there to resources, you'll click on it, and then it'll give you access into the briefs, the papers, and the recorded webinars, as well as helping you in general deal with critical decision support. So as we think about 2016, there's a lot of things going on within the year that certainly have an impact in all of our schools and the way that we run our various businesses and enterprises. Anytime there's an election year, it seems that there's more change and observations in a variety of different ways that can come back and impact our schools. And 2016 was not an exception in any manner. And if you look at some of the headlines and some of the things that we focused on, there's some themes that come out of that, and we're going to talk about what does that mean for our school and what should we be doing now. We had the bombings, the terrorist bombings in New York and New Jersey, the Brussels terrorist attacks, the earthquake in Italy. We had this year the shootings in the nightclub in Orlando. We've had other events during the year that have been horrific in nature to consider. The fire in Oakland just last week where 36 people died. We've had the events that occurred from active shooters across a wide range of schools, public and private, throughout the year. And just recently the attack from the homegrown terrorist at Ohio State. So there's a lot of things that are happening. The common themes around those are violence, the fact they're coming as unexpected to have an impact on an organization, And it really leads us to how do we plan for all of these unplanned events. Cybersecurity and cyber breaches continue to impact, and in fact schools are also a target in that area. You have personally identifiable information. You also have, in many cases, protected health information, and even some HIPAA information around it, and the confidentiality of those things become a significant issue. Now, fortunately, a lot of the strategies that you want to put in place to be able to address these types of threats and crises that are coming in are common. And we'll give you some ideas of how to structure as we go through that today. And in fact, it's probably best to talk about where do you start all of this. Now, the picture you're seeing goes back to the World Trade Center when they were rebuilding after the towers were destroyed on 9/11. And as you know, the new tower is there now. But if you don't have a strong foundation, you can't build a building, you certainly can't build a plan, and you certainly can't manage through a crisis as it occurs. When we think about the coming year and what we need to do and how we start to plan for the unplanned, there are 4 things that can happen to your school, and let's talk about those because that will drive our planning. First of all, something could happen to our facilities, to one of our buildings at our campus. There could be some impact physically to the structure. There could be an impact on our people. That's the workforce area that you're seeing there, our students, our teachers. We could have something that would occur there. There could be an impact on our information security or our information technology. And then finally, an attack on our brand or reputation. Now, a crisis could involve one of these areas or multiple of them. If we think about what could happen to our facility, we could have a fire, we could have a flood, depending upon where you're located, or if you're in California, an earthquake, or along the Mississippi, an earthquake could well play into an area. Those could all be an impact that would be associated with it. To our people, violence suddenly comes to mind. The active shooter is a parent's major concern as they're thinking about what could go wrong in our school life. But there'll be other things that could happen. It could be a communicable illness outbreak. We had the threat this year of Zika, and looking at what that would mean in our schools and the impact that would be associated with it. Information security, cyber breach is a significant problem. It relates in many cases to where individuals go, which websites. If they open a link unintentionally, that would allow malware or ransomware to be downloaded into your computer, causing a particular problem associated with it. We could have an outage that would make us unable to run our school the way that we wanted to. And then finally, no one wants their school to be known as, oh, that's the school that had, and then whatever the problem or the crisis was that would come out. Now, one of the things I want you to think about in starting to plan for any of these 4 areas and what would happen is to focus on 2 things: the actions that you take and the words that you say. There's actually one a little in front of that, and the critical decisions that you have to make, but those relate back again to actions or words. That's going to determine whether the crisis stabilizes or escalates, and in particular, the actions and words in the first hour are the most critical. Through our relationship with RenWeb, if you find yourself in a crisis in your school, you can pick up the phone and call Firestorm, and we'll help you out in that initial critical first hour at no cost. We'll talk about what's happening next, what you need to be planning for, and how those elements come together to work within your school. That Crisis Stop program is available to your school at no cost. So just give us a call 24/7 and we're here to help. But whether it was planned for or not, having a way to make the decisions makes a big difference in terms of the outcome. When we talk about making these decisions, there has to be a crisis management program. What are the things that you need to have in place before the event? What do you do at onset? How do you determine how bad it's going to be? How do you respond to it? How do you recover from it? And then finally, what lessons did you learn from those events? One of the things that we see in many cases is if a plan is there, It might tell you what to do, but doesn't tell you how to do it. If you want to see how useful your plan would be, give it to one of your newest teachers, ask them to read it, describe a situation, and then ask them where in the plan they would go to start to find that solution in the process. But a crisis management program really starts with the senior leadership in your school. We're not talking about an emergency plan, those types of events. It's making those critical decisions. When you want to make a decision, you need some information to look at what's going on within your organization. The new term of art that's emerged over the last several years is a phrase called open source intelligence. If you were a general, you wouldn't want to go to battle without knowing where the enemy was, what's their force count, what kind of weapons do they have, what directions are they starting to move. Similarly, if you find yourself in a crisis, you're going to want to know what's being said by our students, by our parents, what's the media saying, who has a behavior of concern and is on a path to violence, and how do we determine those things? And today, you have the ability to do all of those things to be able to better understand what's occurring, and we'll share more of that as we continue to talk today. But you should be thinking about, for every one of the vulnerabilities and threats that you see within your organization, if that occurred, what would you do? If that occurred, what would you say? That would be a common theme. I did a workshop this week for a group of schools here in Georgia, and we had the senior leadership, the heads of schools, the senior leaders in all of the schools, and we were going through structuring a crisis management plan and how you stop a crisis that's going to evolve. That's the type of thing that you want to be thinking about to establish that structure and how you would make decisions in those areas. And we're going to say it a couple of times today, but one of the things I want to underscore, in a crisis, almost everything you know initially is either incomplete or wrong, and you're going to be forced to make decisions. That's why having the strategies in advance and the communications in the past in place will make a difference in terms of the outcome. Now, what's a poor response? What are some of the characteristics they have in common? It's where people get overconfident. They think, hey, we're smarter than everybody else. We've been running this school for a while. We can handle it. And there's no exposure that we could have that we can't just on the fly handle that and make it come to pass. And what we're going to tell you is probably isn't going to work as well as you would hope or as well as you had thought. I don't know if you had followed after the election, and there are going to be several comments today about the election and some of the results and reactions, but you'll see the posting that was put up by Pamela Taylor, and she made some comments about the First Lady and the reaction. As you can imagine, this got a very strong, fast reaction, and very negatively. And this was a contractor working for the city in the process, and then the mayor commented and others on it, and they started to try to explain, well, hey, we don't want there to be hard feelings, and it starts to come back in and it affected everyone. A general rule in any crisis is if you are explaining, you're losing. If you're trying to talk about why you did this or why you said that, it's going to make a significant difference and put you into a deeper, deeper hole. So we're not going to talk about what was known. We're not going to talk numbers and phrases and statements. And this was clearly a poor statement and a poor response and had that impact throughout the organization. So what are the commonalities of all of that? First of all, there were no controls in space. The comment should have never been posted. The response should have never been made. In general, if there are negative comments out on social media and things that are moving through, we would recommend that you're not out talking back, because that's forcing more and more recognition on it. You want to also figure out what are the resources that you would have in advance. PR is very good to have a relationship there, but PR is a useful tool in peacetime. If you're trying to promote the school and get more people aware of what's going on, That's a very positive area. But if you're in a crisis PR is very different. We want to be able to talk directly to our students, to our parents, to our teachers. We're not going to talk through the media. We're not talking through an outside source. We're going to be able to have that support. So you want to identify who those resources that you could go to before there's a crisis instead of trying to find someone. By the way, a helpful hint is if you're dealing with someone and you're going to them for crisis management support, ask them what crises they've managed, because you don't want this to be their first attempt in those particular areas. You also need this intelligence network that we've been talking about, because that's going to say, is your message getting out? Are people understanding? What else is going on? How are they interpreting the comments we've made, just like the quote that you saw a few minutes ago? Also, we've seen in our schools, our independent and private schools, that sometimes the boards interfere. They start trying to say, oh, hey, we've got to get out in front of this. We need to frame the message. We need to be controlling the dialogue on this particular area, and sending mixed messages that undermines the control of the head of school or the other aspects within it. If you look down at the headline below, it said 5 school board seats are on the line as Prince George reels from abuse scandals. This over the past year, there was inappropriate sexual abuse in Prince George's County, and I know those are public schools. But you can imagine how that forces everybody to be in a position to have to start to think and talk about it. And when these issues come up, you're caught by surprise. The story that you see here is one from this year where a mattress company, Miracle Mattress, ran a series of ads, and that's a video, the picture to the left. I'm not going to show it and run it today. But after 9/11, using a, quote, 9/11 sale, trying to make money and selling mattresses in light of 9/11 and all of the things that went on in that respect. Obviously, it was in bad taste. It was a stupid idea at every level along. But look at Mike's response. Mike here is the owner of Miracle Mattress, and he's going, oh, I didn't know it was happening. Nobody ran it by me. His response weakened everything else associated with it because he was trying to explain at this point. So he appears to be either incompetent, that his people were placing ads without his approval, or there was no control processes within their company, or he was a part of it and he's throwing somebody else under the bus. So generally, a common theme in all of the crises that we've been discussing is that they come as a surprise. Now, I generally have said in other sessions, and I'll repeat again today, that the last time a surprise was good, I was 5 years old, and it was my birthday. Because if someone comes running into your office at school, they're not coming in with good news. They're coming in with a problem. So that surprise catches you at that point, and if you don't have the documented plan, your response will not be as optimal as you would like. So here's a couple of things that you can do to start to get control when you find yourself put in this position. The first is ask why. The first 24 hours are crucial, and of the most crucial portion, it's the first hour. So as this unfolds, you're going to find this pressure that someone, maybe on the board, will come and say, we've got to frame the issue. We need to get out and hold a press conference, or we need to do a press release. If you're being told or having input and pressure from someone that we need to communicate about whatever this crisis is, stop, slow it down, and ask them why. When they give you the answer, well, we should communicate because of this reason, then ask why. And they'll give you a justification for that reason, and then you ask why. If you go through the process of asking why 5 times and are satisfied that those are good answers, and yes, we should definitely communicate, then go ahead and communicate. I will tell you that it's been our experience, by the time you get to that third why, their argument starts to fall apart, and it buys you time. Now, Firestorm, as I mentioned earlier, works with RenWeb to support schools in crisis. So, and it's a program called Crisis Stop, and it's free. The first hour of support in a crisis, and we're available 24/7 to come in to be able to get on the phone and help you through that particular crisis. The first thing we do in crisis stop, the stop stands for stop is stabilize the situation. Second is T, to trigger whatever resources you need. 3 is to opine, that's the O, and P is to prevent the common mistakes. If there's a crisis going on, I would encourage you to slow it down. Actually, time is on your side because we really are moving away from just dealing with the crisis to starting to deal with the consequences associated with that particular event. So slow it down. When you're pressured to talk, ask this why question 5 times. And the reason to do that is that most of what you already know now is going to be wrong, but you're going to be forced to communicate. By pushing through this process, you're going to be able to manage that tightrope. The individual is here. It's by asking why the 5 times. Then if the answers are clear, then proceed. If not, this is an opportunity for you to get this back under control. If you're communicating too early, if you're communicating incorrectly, if you're saying the wrong things, you're going to cause this crisis to escalate rapidly and be worse for everyone that's involved. So when do you communicate? Well, initial communication should be very broad and lack specifics. I'll give you 3 types of communications in just a minute. Oh, back to our friends here at Prince George's County. You can look at the faces in that particular picture and see that they're not really happy about this conversation. How do you justify sexual molestation or assault or anything that happens to children? So your comments initially of communicating should be very broad and not tactical, and certainly not explaining what occurred in this particular event. Now, if you've had someone that's been hurt, or worse, someone that died, or that type of a major loss from a fire, you're going to find that the first responders will be there. I've not run into a police chief or a fire chief who didn't love the media, who wanted to talk and about the particular situation. So if you've had such a serious event, like an active shooter or a fire in your building, let the police chief, let the fire chief hold their press conference. They're going to talk about the problem. They're going to be talking about how they responded and what they found out in their investigation. You don't want to be on the stage with them. You do not want to participate. Let them talk about the problem. In a few minutes, I'll give you things that you can say and talk about when you should be saying them. Because they really like that position, you're going to be talking about the future and not the past. The officials will spend their time talking about the problem. You lead the solution. So as we think about, there are 3 C's in crisis communications. There's coordination. There's talking about the crisis, the brand and reputational impact, and there's compliance. The first C is for coordination. If there's an event going on, we're going to communicate internally to what we want our students and teachers to do. The standard protocol is for shelter in place, lock out, lock down, evacuate. It's generally an internal communication. It's the first one that goes out and to be shared. By the way, if you tell parents that you're in lockdown, don't come to the school, they're going to read that message and say, how quickly can we get there into the process? Now, many of you may have followed the fires that occurred just recently in Gatlinburg, and I think over a dozen people died. There were multiple homes that were destroyed, and there was apparently a problem associated with that wildfire that was developed. The message to evacuate didn't go out. So people were caught and trapped in the last minute and had to get out in the middle of an inferno. Generally, we want our coordination communications fast and very quick throughout the process. So the first thing is coordination. That's generally more internally oriented, and it should happen at the very beginning of the crisis. The crisis itself, the brand, the reputation, what does it mean to us? That's a later communications. Its focus is primarily external. And we would generally not do that in the first 24 hours in a crisis. Finally, the compliance communications occur after everything is settled. You will have to have some notification requirements that you will want to do or think about. For example, if there had been a cyber breach, those people whose identity was taken, you would require to inform them. By the way, the legal requirements are within a reasonable amount of time, and that's not a clearly defined length. So let's look at some coordination communications. After the events at Ohio State, when you think of that attack, they immediately went out and posted these alerts, and you see how they evolved through the day. Continue to shelter in place in North Campus area. Follow the police. A later release. Continue to shelter in place. Avoid the area of the college. More information to follow. So explaining specifically where there was a particular concern. And then finally, active shooter on campus, run, hide, fight. Watts Hall, 19th and College. You've got a specific set of instructions there is the clarity. They're short, they're to the point, and they're directed. So this relates to life and safety when we think of coordination, and it's primarily internal to your group. Now, as it moves into the crisis, then you're trying to think about what's the long-term area. You're working in your school's crisis management plan. As you think about these things, you want to focus on what are the short-term, mid-range, and long-term consequences of the actions that we're going to say. And so here you see President Drake trying to focus on Buckeye Strong, look to unified, secure, in building that. This is a brand and reputation crisis communications. After it's all done, then you can meet the compliance. Here's what we did. Here's why we did it the way we talked about and listed in it. And generally, I would turn that over to the first responders and not have your school playing a role in that communication. Because again, it's talking about the problem and not about the solution. So what can you say? Well, the three themes or home bases are that you will not be defined by the event, that you'll invent the future, and you'll embrace the families. Now, if something terrible happens at your school, that's not what your school is. If I were to go on the home page of your website, I'd look and you'd find your mission statement of what you're trying to do to help children to grow in all aspects of their life, academically, morally, spiritually, athletically. All of those areas are starting to be. That's what your school is about, not the event that happened. Second, you want to invent the future. You're going to change whatever occurred. You want to try to make sure that those types of events can't occur again, that there's not going to have an impact on your campus. So if you're going to increase safety or security or training or whatever it might be, it's the orientation to the future of why it'll be different. And the last is the most important, embracing the families. What are you going to do for those that were hurt or died? That's going to be a measure by all of your other students and your teachers and your parents of what the school is about and what you stand for. These are safe themes. This is what you should be talking about in those types of events. Now, you really cannot manipulate the media here, and one advantage that we have in today's world is you know how to reach directly out and deliver a message to your students, to deliver a message to your parents, to deliver a message to your teachers. And 10 or 20 years ago, we could only do that effectively through the media. Today, you want to use those channels to go direct because you're not going to be able to manipulate that media. The media today is not your friend. They are looking to get their own message out. It's entertainment. It's reality TV. They're trying to sell advertising, and they're going to be geared toward those types of events. If you look on your screen, you'll see two Wall Street journals on the same day, different times. The one on the left of your screen came out first. The one on your right was a later edition during the day. Look at how the media took exactly the same picture, exactly the same story and change the theme. Trump softens his tone. Trump talks tough on wall. There obviously were speeches made during the day, and so there was a further elaboration, and so there was a change. So you're not going to be able to force the media to put your story out your way. It's going to come out their way or their objectives within it. Now, we talked earlier a little bit about consequence management, and let me circle back and pick that up. If you're going to make a decision of something you're going to do or something you're going to say, you have to stop and say, what are the consequences around that if, in fact, we're doing it? So when we talk about crisis management, it's not the life safety, it's not the emergency, those are your other plans that are there. It's about managing the consequences of this crisis as it occurred and is impacting your school. So when we think about those individual areas, think about this story that came out right after the election. Kellogg's pulled ads from Breitbart amid hate speech concerns. If you remember the involvement with Breitbart and the publisher of that particular newspaper and communications network, this was a hate element in felt. Many reacted very strongly and negatively against that. So Kellogg said, well, we'll just pull our ads because we don't want to have anything to do with hate speech. But they didn't think through what are the consequences if they did that. Immediately there was a dump Kellogg, signed the petition to boycott Kellogg's because they had left Breitbart. And so dump Kellogg's breakfast brand, backlist Breitbart, declares hate for 45 million readers. So suddenly, 45 million people felt that they had been labeled as hate speech. That has a significant impact here. And so Kellogg's actually, instead of trying to soothe the water and calm things down and avoid controversy, placed themselves in the center as a result of their communications. No one had thought about what are all the consequences if we do this and how we say it and what does that mean. So when we think about those things, we know certain things, some things we don't know, and that's really at the heart of crisis management and the lessons learned here. So what's missing as you're working on your plans? That green slice of the pie chart there is what you know, and there's a lot that you do know about in a particular crisis event. And you know what you don't know. Maybe there were injuries. You know that people were injured. That's something you know, but you don't know how severely they were injured. So that's something you know that you don't know. But the biggest exposure, the thing that's going to create the most trouble for you in this crisis and managing the consequences associated with it, will be those things that you don't know that you don't know. Those are the ones that will come back to create the problem, just like they did for Kellogg on the previous slide. So what you do is, if you are continually surprised, your decisions and communications will be suboptimal. And if you don't have an intelligence network to be able to monitor that, you're going to find that you will not be able to predict what's going to happen next. Confirming the facts, controlling your messages, identifying consequences, and monitoring those things that are out in an open source area becomes strategically important. There's some interesting statistics in this area. If someone has ill intent, 80% of the time, someone else knows. And 67% of the time, 2 or more people know. And when people know, what do? They talk. And where do they talk today? They talk on social media. If you're not monitoring that, that's an early indicator of what could go wrong, where the problems could be, and what could be happening as those events are starting to emerge. So we talked about something happening to the facility, something happening to your people, something happening to your information security and technology, and finally something happening to your brand and reputation. There are 5 common failures in a disaster or crisis, and you see them listed here, and it would be good to stop and think about them and how your plans would address. The first is failure to control critical supply chains. If you have food in your school? Who supplies the food? What would happen if they're unavailable? Or security or janitorial or other supply functions that are there. Training your employees and students for both work and home, for school and home. The surveys for organizations are that 70 to 80% of employees and staff don't understand what they're to do in a disaster or crisis, and 95% don't have a disaster plan at home. So if there was a problem that was affecting the area and people don't have a plan at home, then those teachers may not come to school. You won't have the resources that you need in order to do your job. The third failure to identify and monitor all threats and risks. We've done a better job across all of our schools with identifying threats and risks, but we haven't done a good job of establishing how we monitor for those. So if you think about this is a threat, weather, you do a good job with monitoring the weather. As we move to the others, that drops off. So take a look at all the vulnerabilities and threats that you have, that you've identified. What are the potential impacts associated with them? How would you monitor that? What's the trigger that would cause you to activate your plans? What actions would you take if that were to occur? And what communications would you send out if in fact you were faced with that? It's easier to edit than it is to create, so planning those messages will make a tremendous difference in terms of outcome. Fourth is conducting exercises and updating your plans. And we're talking about something different than a fire drill. Sitting down, we've got this kind of a problem in our school, how are we going to deal with it? Thinking about what would happen if there had been a field trip and there was an automobile accident and we had students injured or even killed. What would we do? How would we deal with it? What would we say? And that's the last, the failure to have a crisis communications plan. If you don't have your messages out in advance, you're going to be forced to create them at a time that's highly emotional and everyone's under great stress. It's easier to edit than it is to create. So if you've got a base message, then you can adapt it as you would need. Now, when we look at crisis management, we have a maturity model, and we look at 5 dimensions. What's your decision process? How are roles and responsibilities handled? Information clarity, speed of decision making, and finally, communications effectiveness. If you don't have all of this thought out, you're going to find that you're in stage 1 of liability and everything comes as a surprise, and that's where we were talking about suboptimal performance, and it's a good example of that. If you've got some of the elements, you've met some of the basic criteria, but you're still in a reaction mode. You're not controlling events, events are controlling you. If you can move to the next level, it's supportive, you've taken pre-action, you've designed some things, you've started to put it into place, and ultimately the goal is to get to the point where it's strategic, it's a part of the culture within your school. If you look at these, if you were to the right side of the page in several of the areas, that's great, but if you've got one or more categories that are over to the left, then that's what's going to drive your ability to respond in a crisis. This is why it's important that you begin thinking about what are we going to do and how are we going to do it. As we look ahead and we think about 2017, one thing is very obvious. We will be tested in our schools on our plans. Now the only question is, will we be tested before the crisis, or are we going to wait until the actual crisis occurs? If you look at the picture there, and you can see whatever occurred there looked pretty extreme. That was a fire that took out a particular area. As you think through that, what would you do if there was a fire, like in Gatlinburg approaching your school? What would you do if you had an active shooter? How would you manage that? How would you communicate? What would you want to have happen associated with it? We recommend that you follow a predict, plan, perform methodology. Predict what the vulnerabilities and hazards and threats and risks are that you're going to face. Understand what their impacts would be. Talk about how you would monitor to see if these were starting to emerge. Think about at what point you would trigger your response, and what would that response in actions be, and what would that response be in words. Then the plan is making sure that everybody's aware, and the perform is training and testing and better understanding. Generally in a crisis, everybody wants to skip the predict skip the plan and skip the perform and go straight to perform. Even if you don't have everything else, if you find yourself in a crisis, you want to slow it down. What do we know has happened? What options do we have on things to do or things to say? How are we going to be able to manage through that process? That's your strategy. You're moving forward in each of those individual areas and having controls. And what do we think is going to happen next? Because as Kellogg came out with that announcement, they hadn't fully understood what the consequences would be associated with it. The fire in Oakland is an example. That facility, that warehouse, 36 people died in. It was commonly understood that this was an area where people were living. There were flammable materials. There weren't the necessary requirements for that type of an environment, and nobody thought about it. They didn't think about it before the crisis to take sure that they could have made a difference. Had they done so, the losses wouldn't have been nearly as great. Firestorm has worked with schools in crisis, whether it's sexting or cyberbullying or physical bullying or active shooters, all elements of range there. The common theme is you need to be prepared to address those types of events. I want to help you not be in a position to have to pick up the phone and call a parent and say, I'm sorry, your child's not coming home from school today. That'll be the hardest call that you ever have to make. So we're in a different environment today. Think about the crises that you could face, sit down and go through an exercise to see how we would make decisions. RenWeb and Firestorm make virtual exercises available throughout the year that you can assemble your crisis team in and participate in making decisions. In 2016, we did active shooter, we did sexting and cyberbullying, we did communicable illness with Zika, and then we did a natural disaster. Think about your plans. Make sure that you have tested them. There's a brief from today's webinar. You can go to firestorm.com/briefs and then download it. You can also go there and get links to previous webinars and papers. You can also share a link so that others in the school can see these webinars to learn and grow. Our thanks go to RenWeb for underwriting this webinar series and supporting each of you each day in your schools. Their system offers some unique features that can be useful in a crisis in coordinating your information and flow, and as we look at those events, we'll continue to share them. So if you've got questions, you can go to firestorm.com. You can send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com, or you can call us at 800-321-2219. That number is manned 24/7. If you find or feel your school is in a crisis, that first hour of conversation won't cost you anything. Not having that conversation might cost you everything. We hope that you don't need it. We hope you're not going to have that type of a situation to occur, but we're here to help and support in every way. I thank you for all you're doing to help our young people. The work that you do is extremely critical, and the difference that you're making in young lives is absolutely essential. Thank you for that. I wish you happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year. The webinar series will continue next year with a new editorial calendar. We look forward to speaking to you each month. Have a great day, and Happy New Year, everyone. Goodbye.